binge-worthy wave. It's the gnome. I just thought I'd talk about my first love, punk rock. Um, no offense to my fiance. I love you, babe. Yeah, this was before we met. Yeah, just teasing. Here, I love my fiance to death, obviously. But I want to talk about my love for punk rock, punk culture, subculture, and uh, how punk culture and punk music is a lifelong passion for me. Um, I figured I'd take out the old safety pin, put in my septum. That's obviously a reflection of my punk roots, physically. Obviously, punk is not about the fashion, but that has become part of the culture over the years. Anyway, as with a lot of subcultures, it's about the music first. Um, I've literally been sorry about that. I've literally been a huge fan of punk rock since I was in diapers. In fact, the first thing, if you asked me when I was 2 or 3, the first thing I ever wanted to be when I grew up, I would have said a punk rocker. So I would have said, like, he asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up? It was a punk rocker, no question. And I was a fan of The Clash when I was about, early as I can remember, about 2, I was a fan of The Clash. Um, I liked all their stuff. I liked, their early stuff, songs like White Riot and Career Opportunities, and I like their latest stuff from like Rock the Casbah and the stuff from Combat Rock. I'm still a huge Clash fan. I liked all kinds of other bands by the time I was about 6 years old. Sex Pistols, Dead Kennedys, all those great bands, Bad Brains, you name it. That was the Angelic Upstarts at the beginning, and that was Their Destiny Is Coming, another great band, the Angelic Upstarts. Um, so yeah, back to the history of it. Um, like I said, I've literally been into punk rock since I was in diapers. I was born in 1982, and the punk movement was still going strong. Um, One of my uncles from my mom's side of the family was into a lot of the music at the time, so he was playing all this stuff for me whenever I was around, his place, whenever I was in his care. So, in diapers, I'm walking around rocking out to the Exploited, Dead Kennedys, and all those different bands, and still enjoying it to this day. And even now, my go-to bands, a lot of them are either punk rock bands or from the punk period. In addition to the standard punk rock groups, he also got me into groups like Joy Division, The Cure, Susie and the Banshees, Oingo Boingo, stuff that came out around the punk period, and that still very much defines who I am today. As I said, punk is a genre of music. It's also, it's a subculture that's larger than that. There's an attitude associated with it. Um, it's very liberating in a lot of ways. There's this independent spirit about punk rock, a lot of DIY, a lot of this idea that you do things your own way as long as you're not harming anybody, and it's an idea I've always generally supported. I'm not against authority, but I've always had a suspicion of authority since I was very little. An independent spirit. I didn't mind taking orders, but I wanted to carry those orders out my way. I didn't like being micromanaged in any way, and definitely a dislike of authoritarianism. If I thought the management was a little too heavy-handed, I was likely to speak out against it and even act out, nothing destructive. So that's been a lifelong thing with me, punk rock, and kind of having the quote-unquote punk attitude. And even now, at 36, well over 30 years later, what am I still listening to? A lot of stuff in the late 70s, early 80s. So, still very passionate about punk rock. I still go to as many shows as I can. I was really frustrated. It's really funny because I came to that generation after the punk explosion where, since I was schooled in it when I was early, I was old enough to remember the end of it, the end of the big punk scene or scenes as we know of it. And then what happened is, in the early 90s, I remember there were these new bands advertised, new punk bands, quote unquote. And I remember hearing them just being really disappointed, thinking, this isn't punk. Musically it didn't sound like punk. It was very mainstream, very polished, musically whiny even. The topics were no longer as heavy as they used to be. Not that punk always had to be political, but it seemed like they had a lot more to say back then. And I remember bands like Green Day and The Offspring when they came out, and I didn't dislike the bands on their own, but I had no idea that they were trying to be punk. I had no idea that Green Day was thought of as a punk band. Didn't sound like punk to me, or The Offspring, and then later it became even further disillusioned. It's like, what? This stuff is not punk. And sorry about that. That put me at a disconnect with a lot of other people my age, because a lot of other people my age, the only exposure to punk was the mainstream 90s bands that came out. So in a lot of ways punk had died in some way, but the old bands and the underground were still going strong, still playing. I still go to shows every now and then when I can. It's not always easy. Sorry about that. Very primitive technology. This is not scripted at all, but still got to support the bands. I remember I saw TSOL play relatively late in life. Great show. I still get excited whenever they come around to town. And so they do. I still support local scenes. I try to network with other punk artists, people in the punk community. It's actually been a mostly rewarding experience. It's also been kind of tough because growing up in the neighborhood I grew up in, pretty much like there were very few people in the punk rock, any kind of alternative culture. So during my teens, I was it. And even as an adult, I live in San Pedro now, which had its own punk scene that kind of fizzled out and disappeared. That's really sad. It'd be great to have an ongoing, local punk scene again. But I'm still trying to connect with the local punks around here, the local punk community. It hasn't been easy, but slow and steady wins the race. But here I am, 36 years old, still an active punk rocker, as active as I can be. It's my first love musically. Not sure how in depth I got in this video. Probably touch up on it again later, some other video. But these are unscripted, these videos so far. I come in with some idea of what I want to talk about, but it's not a scripted thing, so there you go. There you go, lifelong punk rocker here.